One of the things that we've learned from 160 plus interviews with people who have made significant career shifts is that there's a pretty solid chunk of those people who were pushed into their second act through some sort of a traumatic experience. Nobody's going to agree with being let go from a job that they like being at, but it opens your eyes. And if you look at it as an opportunity, you can really find your way to what's going to motivate you and what's going to bring you more fulfillment.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to the Bold Moves How Did You Know podcast, a podcast for the naturally curious who want to define their own path. Here, I'm sharing bold move stories that propelled my guests from curiosity to action. And in doing so, they've defined a path that is purposeful to them. Through these stories, I hope you'll be inspired to pursue your boldest dreams. Scott Merritt is my guest today, and he is a strategic public relations and media relations expert with more than 25 years of experience in building results-driven strategic communications campaign for a wide range of clients. He founded his company, Strategic Global Media, after spending most of his career working for and leading teams at other PR agencies. His work includes PR and outreach efforts for a diverse array of B2B and B2C accounts from every industry you can imagine: tech, fintech, energy, automotive, healthcare, nonprofit, and aviation. Scott is also a trained corporate spokesperson, a published writer and editor, and host of the Webby Award-nominated Second Act Stories podcast. I have asked Scott to join me today for this conversation about second act careers and how they are linked in many ways to bold moves. He's the perfect person to talk about this topic with us because it's the namesake of his podcast, and he himself is in the midst of his own second act career. So I want to dig in. But first, Scott, hi. Thank you for being here today.
Tristan, thank you so much for having me. I need to bring you everywhere with me so I can have that kind of intro.
Well, you have done a lot over your accomplished career, and I'm excited for you to share your bold move story. It's funny because usually you're the one behind the microphone pitching your clients to media for interviews, but today you're in the hot seat. How does it feel?
It's always weird to be on the other side of the microphone of the equation. I like to hide out behind the scenes and just let the magic happen. And here I am.
Thank you for agreeing to be in the hot seat. I am so excited to share your story with the listeners around second act careers. Can you tell us about your bold moves journey to your second act career? What happened?
I would classify what I did as less of a second act and more of an unexpected continuation of a first act.
Okay.
The people that we speak to on second act stories have done things that are like wildly different. A real estate broker who now hunts pythons in the Everglades. I'm never going to make a career move like that, as far as I can tell. My personal journey, second act, though, is starting my own firm, which was never really in the cards. It was never something that I intended to do. I wasn't born with that entrepreneurial spirit. One day I'm going to start my own agency and I'm going to put my name on the door. That was never, ever the plan. It happened by circumstance, and I went into it reluctantly. I actually coined a term for myself. I called myself a reluctrepreneur. That's only because I wound up starting my firm when I realized that it was the only option left on the table.
Okay, explain more. That's intriguing. What does that mean?
So I had spent my whole career working for other people. I loved the notion of having that job security that comes along with having a full-time job, and knowing how much is going to be in the bank next Friday, and having my paid time off and a full support system and a team behind me. Just liked the idea of having that sort of weird safety net that comes along with working for somebody else. But I came to realize, after spending about a decade with a firm that I thought I would retire from, they came up with a succession plan. The founder of the company was looking to get out and was starting to put things in motion. He put together this succession plan and I wasn't part of it. And for better or for worse, I found myself looking for new work and I was staring down the barrel of 50 years old. And I was fortunate that my network went to work for me. Hooray for networking. I wound up getting a handful of interviews right after I left. It was 4 or 5 interviews. And with each successive interview, I realized that I was less and less interested in working for somebody else. I decided that even if I got an offer, I probably wouldn't accept it. I took account of the whole situation and I went, guess the only thing left is to start my own thing. So I did.
That's pretty fun. I love that you call yourself a reluctapreneur. I think a lot of people can relate to that, especially when maybe your bold move is a result of a layoff or happened to me, happened to you. And we're faced with okay, what's the next step here? And sometimes it's clear in terms of like just continuing to interview for new jobs and figure out what that might look like from a corporate careers perspective. But sometimes it does cause you to step back and really think, is that what I want to keep doing? What was that reckoning moment for you like?
Let me step back for a second. One of the things that we've learned from 160 plus interviews with people who have made significant career shifts
Yeah.
is that there's a pretty solid chunk of those people who were pushed into their second act through some sort of a traumatic experience, whether that's job loss or losing a loved one, or for some people, it's winding up in prison. For other people, it's different. But trauma is a pretty significant driver of embarking on some sort of a second act.
That makes a lot of sense, especially in today's economy or world where companies are, laying off a lot more people. And I see that all the time in my network where it's, oh, another batch of people have been laid off today. So I get that. I can't relate to the loss of a loved one or other traumatic events that could make you sit back and reevaluate. But I guess that's the point, is the trauma causes you to reevaluate your life and what you're doing and how you want to live the rest of your days. Is that what you're experiencing?
Yeah. And for me, it was the loss of a job. And what I came to realize was job security is great and it's there until it isn't.
Yeah.
And then when it's not there, you realize just how susceptible you are to other people's motive. Do I agree with being let go? No, right? Nobody's going to agree with being let go from a job that they like being at, but it opens your eyes. And if you look at it as an opportunity, you can really find your way to what's going to motivate you and what's going to bring you more fulfillment.
So we've been talking about second act careers. I want to get more into that. So you joined as co-host of the podcast Second Act Careers a couple years ago, and it's a really interesting story in itself. So can you share with us how you became the co-host of your podcast?
Sure. Second Act Stories was started by Andy Levine, who was the president and is now chairman of a large PR firm in New York. We first came across one another years and years ago when he needed some help. I was available for contract help, and we became quick fans of one another. This is back in like 2003, 2004. We swore that we would find a way to work together again. I had always wanted to start a podcast. I was early money on podcasts. I've been listening to podcasts daily since 2007. And I always wanted to start one, but I knew that if I started one, it had to have a purpose. There needed to be a reason for people to want to tune in. So it took a long time, but I finally landed on an idea that I thought would resonate, that didn't really have a lot of competition. I sought out advice from Andy, who had started Second Act Stories a couple of years earlier. And while we were talking, he said, let me throw you a little curveball. What if instead of launching your new thing, why don't you join me and we can partner on Second Act Stories? My concept wasn't totally different. It was different enough, but it wasn't totally different. And I didn't see that question coming. When he put that out there, I said, let me sleep on it for a couple of days because I'm all in, especially if I'm going to be in on something that somebody else started. So I want to make sure that I'm going to add maximum value. I'm going to make it better. And so after a couple of days, I said, you know what? Yeah. I called him up and I said, I'm in. Let's do this.
It's a good thing you're in and you joined, because only a few years later, the podcast has become a Webby Award nominated podcast. I believe I read in the how-to category alongside Michelle Obama's podcast. So you have definitely put your stamp on the podcast and turn it into something that is capturing the attention of worldwide audiences, which is an amazing feat. So I want to dig in a little bit more to these second act stories. And the first question I have for you, which we already talked about, but it's, how do you define a second career?
It's a career where you make a decision to leave something that you've already built and start something completely, entirely different, usually driven by some sort of purpose. A second act career can truly be anything that's different than what you were doing before. But for our purposes, we're looking for that little bit of magic, that little bit of pixie dust. It's one thing if you're working in customer service at Lowe's and then you move over to a grocery store. That's some form of a second act, but that's not all that interesting. It's the old argument where I can't necessarily define it, but I'll know it when I see it.
What was intriguing about the theme of second act stories to you? Was it just this trying to drill into the details of how people make these dramatic decisions about changing from one thing to another?
I've always been interested in telling a great story. And to me, these people all have these remarkable stories, right? And not everybody is high profile and not everybody's got like a big famous name or had some sort of a celebrity career. One of Andy's interviews was really interesting. He interviewed a guy who was a drug dealer, down on his luck, out of shape, overweight, and he became one of Soul Cycle's top fitness instructors.
Oh, wow.
He had this unbelievable, super interesting journey, right? We've spoken to people who were firemen who opened stores and somebody who harkens back to growing up with grandma who taught them how to knit and opened up a sewing supply store. So there are these second act heroes in everyday life, but there are also really great high profile people who have had amazing second act careers. One of my most recent interviews was with Dan Spitz, who's a guitarist. He was the early lead guitarist for the band Anthrax, a thrash metal band. Back in the 80s. He's one of the pioneers of thrash metal. Today, he's one of the world's most acclaimed and sought after master watchmakers.
Incredible. As I was looking through your catalog and I've been listening, is there anything common about the age range that people approach their second acts, or is it all over the board?
There is no right answer to that. It's just a matter of people who realize at some point that they're just not fulfilled in what they're doing. They just don't love what they're doing and they want to do something else. And very often it's tied to finding purpose, right? It's satisfaction, right? How many people are unhappy in the work that they're doing? There's tons of people that are unhappy with what they do, but they're so afraid to make a change that they stick with what they're doing and they never really find that satisfaction. One of the common threads that we found is that money is no substitute for purpose.
The name of this podcast is two parts: Bold Moves and How Did You Know? And I think second act stories, careers have so much to do with bold moves in both of these parts of my podcast name. So I want to ask you about both. What do you think the link is between second act careers and bold moves?
Everybody who embarks on a second act career is making a bold move. It's a matter of finding it in yourself to be able to stop saying, hey, I'd like to, or I want to, or I should, or maybe someday, and really finding that moment where the rubber meets the road and having that flashpoint where you say, okay, I'm no longer doing this. I am now fully committed to doing that. That's bold. And that's really freaking hard to do.
So challenging. It forces you to get uncomfortable and have to shake up your internal identity or your individual identity in a lot of cases to say, okay, I can be the person that makes that bold move.
Yeah, one of the things that we realized is that the people who do it, they can't not do it. They have to. They're driven by something bigger
Mm.
that they just have to do it. They have to find their way to whatever that second act is. But you and I had very similar experiences where we had to figure out what our path was. We didn't have a choice. There are two kinds of people who make these career changes from all the interviews that we've done. There are two categories of people. There are leapers
Yeah.
and there are planners. There are some people who just have to analyze everything, have to have everything in order, and have to make sure that they know exactly how it's going to work out or to the best of their ability. Then there are other people who say, I'm done doing that. Now I'm on to this. And there's no plan in place, right? Those are the leapers. I don't know what it would be like to be a leaper.
Me neither.
Which-
Do not relate.
But what we found, they say, jump and the net will appear. I don't know. I just don't have that kind of trust and faith. What we realize, though, is that there is no discernible difference between the success rate of leapers and planners.
Mm.
And so that's an interesting finding. Even though you and I are both planners,
Yeah.
we were forced to leap, weren't we?
Oh,
We
definitely.
so we may be planners, but we've lived the leaper lifestyle and we didn't love it, but it worked out, didn't it?
Do you know what? It's a great point. And you're right. I did not love it. The unexpectedness, the surprise of waking up the next day and not having a job was terrifying. And now being on the other side of it, I am living a more fulfilled life. I definitely see all the advantages of writing my own story. Even if I decide one day to take on another corporate job, I have a whole new perspective on pursuing things because I love them, because I want to do them, versus being guided by somebody else's purpose. So I
Yeah.
really benefited from this unplanned leap.
I'm not carving any new ground here, but I will say that as much as I didn't ever really want to start my own thing and I wasn't happy about being laid off from a job that I thought that I'd be at forever, I've never been happier. 3 years in, this has been nothing but successful, thank God. And I've been absolutely happy every single day that I wake up that I can do my own thing and I don't have to rely on anybody else to put food on my table.
That's a great transition point to talk about the how did you know part. And more so going back to also your own experience and the experiences of the people that you speak to on your podcast. So this woman, I keep having Python lady in my head, right? She wanted to go from real estate to Python huntress, I think you call her. Like, where do you even start when you are making a move like that? I think we already talked about some reasons why people are held back. Financial is a big one, but there's
Yeah.
also like the piece of feeling stuck and not knowing how to make such a significant pivot like that. What have you learned either from your own story or from other people on your podcast about how they put one foot in front of the other to completely change directions?
So from my perspective, the opportunity that was presented to me was start your own thing. And so I did. And I filed my papers with the Secretary of State. And then suddenly I found myself the founder and president of a company with no revenue. And where does revenue come from? Revenue comes from clients. How do I get clients? I'm starting from zero. So I did the only thing that I know how to do, which is what I do for every one of my clients, which is we identify what their strategic goals are and we create a plan. We create a plan to help them meet those goals. And that's what I did. I created a plan and I didn't write it down on paper, but I started to execute that plan. And before I knew it, it was working. And suddenly I had clients and client opportunities and leads. And from that day forward, it was never really a huge concern about where does revenue come from. I enacted a strategic plan and it started to work. That's what needed to happen. But really, from a bigger picture perspective, failure is not an option. When I founded this company, everybody I spoke to said, you should have done this a long time ago, and you're going to be so successful, and you'll be great at this. And I feel like I was the only one that didn't have that same belief. But it started to become clear that as long as you're committed, if I'm in, I'm all in. I'm all in. And failure isn't an option, right? The only person that I spoke to that wasn't 100% confident that I would make this thing successful was my own mother. I told her that I was starting this thing, and I'm sure it comes out of concern, right? What if you can't find clients and then you don't have money and then you can't collect unemployment? And I said, Mom, unemployment's not the goal here, right? If I work at all, I can't collect welfare. Where does it stop? So that wasn't the goal. The goal was build a company, start generating revenue, have success, find clients that you like working with, and use that to your advantage. Leverage those clients to slingshot into further success because they will refer. And that's worked out.
The people that you've interviewed, I wonder if anybody has ever started their second act as a side project or a hobby before they launch full into the business component of it. Because I wonder if that's another idea when people feel held back. And I agree with you, having that strategic plan and being able to execute on that helps give you some confidence. But I think another way to do it might be also as a side project to just get some confidence that the strategic plan you put in place, you can garner some small successes and then build your confidence that way to go
Yeah.
all in. Has anybody launched their second act as a side project before they went full in?
Yeah, plenty of them did. They fall squarely into the planner category. These are people who knew that they wanted to do something different. They knew they couldn't just up and leave a high paying full time job or a job that they needed to be able to survive and keep their family afloat. Yeah, lots and lots of people did. The one that really sticks out to me wasn't really a business story, but he was a fireman for the FDNY, New York City, and started to build this incredibly successful career as a comedian. His name is Brian Quinn. He's known as Q on Impractical Jokers. And he also happened to be a member of this comedy troupe called the Tenderloins. And they won some comedy contests and then they wound up getting picked up for this show, Impractical Jokers. And he was a fireman still full time, like 4 or 5 seasons into the run of Impractical Jokers.
Awesome.
And it wasn't until it was a very big success that he wound up being able to leave the fire department and make that his full-time job.
That is so cool. I love that. I love you just lean into your passion and start doing that more often. And you never know what twists and turns it can take you in.
Yeah, and sometimes it happens purely by accident.
Yes.
There's a guy named Rick Beato who anybody who's spent more than 10 minutes on YouTube will probably know him. He's got this white hair. He's always sitting in a studio and he does a lot of music. His channel on YouTube is called Everything Music. He was a studio engineer. He produced songs. He wrote songs. He engineered. He's just always been around music, but he also had this unbelievably eating knowledge of music. And he started creating YouTube videos because he put one video up once where his son, who was like 8 years old at the time, he was born with perfect pitch. And he demonstrated his son's perfect pitch in this a couple minutes long YouTube video. And it went viral and it got hundreds and then thousands and then tens of thousands of views. And somebody said, you should put that on YouTube and you should share that with the world. And that kind of opened his eyes to the opportunities that YouTube presented. And at 54 years old, he started making these videos about music and his breakdowns of music and all these different interesting topics around music. And, then bang, 54 years old, he's got this incredibly successful career as a YouTuber, lots and lots of money making YouTube videos. And it just happened totally by accident because he happened to put a video up that went viral and realized that there was potential there.
am going to be speaking to a woman who is the personality of Tips from Dead People TikTok. And she's got 170,000 followers on TikTok.
Wow.
And I'm so curious to hear her story. The interview is in a couple of weeks, but my guess is that it's very similar to this one, where she posted real desire, passion, and decided that she was going to start reading them and sharing her takeaways about them via TikTok. And now she's got all of these obituary enthusiasts who tune into her account to see what the latest tip from a dead person is. So I can't wait to hear that story in a few weeks. But I love these accidental stories where you just find your way into your next second act.
Yeah, that's super interesting because I think, when you think of dead people, they're the ones that accumulated all the wisdom, right? Then they're gone. Learning from the people who have already been here and done it all.
She's got a lot to say and a lot to share. And I love her energy around sharing these tips too. I think that matters a lot. All right, a couple more questions for you. Are there any misconceptions you think people have about starting a second act career that you think is important to dispel?
The reason that we do this is to demonstrate that it can be done. So many people think, well, I've been working in the accounting department for 22 years. I can't make a change, Bob. That's nonsense. You can. Anybody can make a change. Anybody can embark on a second act career. If it's in your bones, you'll find a way to do it.
Mm.
You have to do it. You'll find a way and you will be successful. And every single one of these people, and we've got, lots more interviews coming, and we've already done 150 of them. There's a story every day. You never know where somebody started when you meet them, but you do know when somebody's not happy with what they're doing. I think that there's a number, only 23% of people are truly happy and satisfied with what they do. Everybody else is just mucking it through the day and just grinding it out. And these are the weekend warriors, the people who dread Monday mornings. Why? Why would you live that way? Why wouldn't you do something that brings you a lot more satisfaction and fulfillment? Not everything is going to be a highly lucrative career, but if you have that personal satisfaction, if you find your purpose, money becomes less important. You figure out a way to get by because you are much happier in life. And you need money, but it's just not a substitute.
That's a great place to leave off, but I need to ask you my final question. What do you know today about being bold you wish you would have known earlier on?
I think being bold is something that you owe to yourself. I didn't always know that. And I think most people think that they just have to conform and live by everybody else's rules. And that's the only way to really be successful in weaving your way through life. That's bullshit. I don't subscribe to that at all anymore. I did for a long time. But it wasn't until I realized that doing my own thing, living by my rules, operating my own way is the only true way that I'll be successful.
Thank you, Scott. It has been amazing getting to chat with you. And congratulations on your Webby Award nominated podcast, Second Act Stories. I would suggest that everybody who's a listener of this podcast would love Scott's podcast, Second Act Stories. So please go check that out. If people want to connect with you further, Scott, where can they go?
Okay, so if you want to learn more about Second Act Stories, we are on all the social platforms. We can also be found at secondactstories.org. My company is Strategic Global Media, and it's spelled the way it sounds, and we're at strategicglobalmedia.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. I am happy to add everybody to my network. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. Share it all. I dump it all out there. I tell the truth about PR, and I have some podcasting stuff woven in.
Awesome. Thank you for being here, Scott.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And For everyone else, I am looking forward to seeing you inside the next episode. Thank you for joining our conversation today, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.